Welcome to the Right News Network.
Welcome to your World News Update. I'm Emma, bringing you today's top stories from around the globe. We're following breaking developments in the Middle East tonight, where Iran has submitted a new peace proposal to the United States through Pakistani mediators, even as military tensions continue to escalate. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has this. Layla?
Well, Emma, Iranian officials delivered this proposal just this week through Pakistani channels, and it comes right in the middle of some pretty intense military activity. We've learned that RAF forces have shot down over 100 Iranian drones and missiles attacking a coalition base in Iraq. So you've got this strange moment where there's active combat happening while diplomacy is supposedly moving forward.
What's actually in this proposal that Iran is putting on the table?
Look, the core issue here is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran wants guarantees that the U.S. won't restrict shipping through this critical waterway, and they're pushing back hard at what they see as American military overreach in the region. The thing is, Trump's administration has basically said they're committed to keeping a naval blockade going, so there's this fundamental clash over who controls that strait. It's become the deal breaker for both sides.
Layla, appreciate it. We'll continue following this story. Also on the world front, the Trump administration faces a critical deadline on Middle East military operations that expires this Friday. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has more on what Congress will decide. Marcus?
Well, Emma, the 60-day war powers clock is running out. And right now, the White House hasn't officially said whether they're going to ask Congress for formal authorization to keep troops in the region. What we're hearing from Hill sources is they're likely headed towards some kind of extension vote, probably early next week. The thing is, this has become this recurring issue where presidents of both parties kind of sidestep the war powers resolution, and Congress just sort of goes along with it.
So what happens if they simply let that Friday deadline pass without seeking authorization?
Look, technically, Congress could sue or withhold funding, but honestly, that rarely happens. What's more likely is you see Democrats make a lot of noise about constitutional overreach, while Republicans argue the president needs operational flexibility. In practice, these deployments just continue. The real question is whether this administration wants to burn political capital fighting Congress over this, or just go through the motion of asking for extension and moving on.
Marcus Webb, appreciate the reporting. Still on world, the Trump administration is making a novel legal argument about America's military operations in Iran, and it hinges on whether a ceasefire actually stops the clock on war powers. Layla, good to have you back. What's the latest on how this legal standoff is playing out?
Well, Emma, so what's happening here is pretty significant. The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is essentially arguing that because there's a ceasefire in place, the 60-day War Powers Act deadline doesn't actually apply anymore. He's saying the timer pauses when hostilities pause. But here's the thing. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are pushing back hard, saying U.S. forces are still very much active in the region, even though we're not dropping bombs right now.
So, does the administration actually have legal ground to stand on with this argument?
Look, this is pretty untested territory. The War Powers Act was written in 1973, and there's real ambiguity about whether a ceasefire counts as an end to hostilities. Some legal scholars think the administration's got a point if you read it narrowly. But most constitutional experts and lawmakers are saying this is a stretch. They're interpreting the law to mean the president has to either get Congress on board or stop operations completely. What we're likely to see is a real constitutional showdown.
Layla, appreciate it. Still on world affairs, billions of people could face food shortages and soaring prices if fertilizer supplies are disrupted by the Iran conflict. Yara International, the world's largest fertilizer firm, says the crisis could have dramatic consequences, particularly for Africa's poorest communities. Watch for any coordinated action from world leaders to protect global food security in the weeks ahead. Continuing on world affairs, the Trump administration's hard line on Iran is now threatening to spike global oil prices toward $140 a barrel, while simultaneously straining alliances with European nations. The president is considering pulling U.S. troops from Italy and Spain over their disagreements on Iran policy, following similar threats against Germany. Without diplomatic resolution, analysts warn the prolonged blockade and military repositioning will reshape energy markets and reshape America's role in NATO. As the Trump administration pursues diplomatic talks with Iran, a major American military asset is heading out of the Middle East. That's creating an opening for other regional players to reshape the landscape. Marcus rejoins me now. Marcus, what's driving this carrier withdrawal?
Well, Emma, the USS Gerald R. Ford has been at sea for 10 months, and it's in need of repair, so it's leaving the region. But here's the thing. The timing is really significant because it happens just as Trump is trying to press Tehran into peace negotiations. So you've got this reduction in American firepower right when the administration's betting on diplomacy. That's a pretty big bet.
And Syria's making a move here too.
Exactly. Look, Damascus is pitching itself as a neutral corridor, offering its Banias port as an alternative to the Hormuz Strait for shipping. Syrian officials are saying they don't want to ally with Iran or Israel. They're basically saying we're open for business and we're not picking sides. It's a pretty savvy play for a country that just came out of civil war.
But can you really trust Syria's neutrality claim?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Syria's still got deep ties to Iran, despite what officials are saying now. The real question is whether this becomes an actual economic corridor or just posturing. If negotiations with Iran move forward, Syria could become really important. If they collapse, that carrier absence might become a real problem fast.
Marcus, appreciate it? Authorities in the UK are investigating stabbings targeting Jewish residents in North London as a possible operation linked to Iran. Prime Minister Keir Starmer condemned the attacks on the two men, with investigators now examining potential foreign connections. We'll continue following this developing situation as British intelligence works to determine whether state actors were involved. Moving to the markets now, manufacturers are facing their highest input costs in 4 years. And it's already starting to squeeze grocery prices and everything else Americans buy. Our finance editor, Sophia Reeves, has this. Sophia?
Well, Emma, the ISM's prices paid index hit 84.6 on Friday, and that's the fourth straight month of increases. What's driving this is really the energy shock we saw back at the end of February when that attack on Iran disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Gasoline and diesel shot up, and now those transportation costs are flowing through the entire supply chain. Grocers, manufacturers, everybody.
So when do consumers start feeling this at the register?
Look, they're already starting to feel it. The March inflation report came in much hotter than expected. And what's interesting is manufacturers can't just absorb these costs. They're going to pass them on. The question is whether this is temporary or whether we're locked into higher prices for a while. If geopolitical tensions don't ease and those shipping routes stay disrupted, we could see this pressure stick around through the second quarter at least.
Sophia, appreciate it? The Pentagon is moving aggressively to put artificial intelligence to work in its most sensitive operations. The Defense Department just announced classified contracts with 7 major AI companies, including OpenAI, Google, and NVIDIA, but notably excluded Anthropic, which had previously done classified work for the military. Watch how this reshapes the defense technology landscape and what it means for America's military edge. Two major tariff shifts are reshaping global trade dynamics this week. China has eliminated duties for nearly all African nations, while the Trump administration has scrapped Scotch whiskey tariffs, a move it says honors King Charles. The competing trade strategies underscore how tariffs have become the primary tool for diplomatic leverage in an increasingly fractured global economy. Now, our in-depth analysis of the day, the story dominating the headlines, examined from every angle. Iran has submitted a new peace proposal to the United States through Pakistani mediators, but President Trump is holding firm on the naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, with 23 days of conflict now costing the Pentagon an estimated $25 billion, inflation in America spiking to 3.6%, and Britain's food supply chain described by The Telegraph as genuinely broken. Meanwhile, back home, Nigel Farage is demanding the Iranian embassy in London be shut down after it reportedly called on Iranian citizens in Britain to sacrifice their lives for the regime. The stakes couldn't be higher, militarily, economically, and now right here on our own streets. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is this Iranian peace proposal a genuine olive branch, or is Tehran simply doing what it always does and playing for time?
Thanks, Emma. Let me be blunt. This is a stalling tactic, full stop. The Iranians have sat at more negotiating tables than I've had hot dinners, and every single time, the purpose has been to buy time, relieve pressure, and then resume whatever activity the talks were supposed to stop. The Pakistani mediation channel is interesting. It tells you Iran is isolated enough to need a third-party interlocutor, but it does not tell you Tehran is serious. What tells you Tehran is serious is when they agree to verifiable dismantlement of their nuclear infrastructure, and we are nowhere near that conversation. Trump is right to hold the blockade. The Strait of Hormuz is the pressure lever, and the moment you release it without a binding, verifiable agreement, you've handed Iran exactly what it wants. Douglas Murray has been saying for years that the West's fatal mistake with Iran is treating it as a rational state actor amenable to conventional diplomatic incentives. It is a revolutionary theocracy, and its calculus is entirely different from ours. And here's what nobody wants to say out loud. The longer this drags on, the greater the risk that Iran's nuclear scientists, the ones Senator Angus King is worried about, decide that the only way to prevent this happening again is to actually get the bomb.
But Marcus, isn't that precisely the argument against maintaining the blockade? If military pressure accelerates their nuclear program rather than dismantling it, hasn't Trump actually made the world less safe? And Sophia, I know you've been watching the economic data closely. The Economist is showing inflation at 3.6%. Total Energies is capping fuel prices in France. At what point does the economic pain become unsustainable?
Well, look, Marcus isn't wrong about the nuclear risk, but here's what I think he's missing. There's a breaking point in every economic confrontation, and the question isn't just whether Iran blinks first, it's whether Western consumers blink first. We're at 3.6% inflation in America. The Strait of Hormuz carries 21 million barrels of oil per day. Britain's food supply chain is fracturing because the disruption isn't just about fuel. It's about fertilizer inputs, shipping costs, the entire logistics infrastructure. Total Energies capping prices in France is a corporate band-aid on an arterial wound. If this continues for another 60 days, you're not looking at a 3.6% inflation index. You're looking at 5, potentially 6%. And at that point, the political calculus in Washington changes dramatically. The War Powers Resolution gives Congress a 60-day window, and I can already hear the Democratic caucus sharpening their knives. The economic pressure on ordinary Americans becomes the political pressure on Trump, and that is absolutely what Tehran is counting on when they submit this proposal.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. The economic pain is real, I'm not dismissing it, but the alternative is what exactly? We lift the blockade, Iran pockets the concession, and in 3 years we're dealing with a nuclear-armed regime that controls the Strait of Hormuz permanently. That's not a solution, that's a catastrophe in slow motion. Look, $25 billion is a lot of money. 100 Iranian drones and missiles a day is a lot of ordnance. But the cost of capitulating to economic pressure now is a world where Iran has the bomb and knows it worked. And while we're talking about costs, can we talk about what is happening in London? The Iranian embassy calling on citizens in Britain to sacrifice their lives for the regime? Farage is absolutely right. Close it. Expel the staff. That's not a cultural question. That's a national security emergency happening right now on British soil.
Here's what I want to know. We're 23 days in. The Pentagon is already at $25 billion, and the war powers clock is ticking. Where does this actually end? Sophia, where do you see this going over the next 3 to 6 months?
The way I see this playing out, there are really two realistic near-term paths. Either this Iranian proposal contains something substantive enough for Trump to claim a win, genuine nuclear verification mechanisms, not the window dressing we got from the JCPOA, and you get a ceasefire that at least temporarily stabilizes oil markets. Or the talks collapse, the blockade holds, inflation climbs past 4%, and we hit that 60-day congressional wall around the same time the economic data gets genuinely ugly. If current trends continue, the political pressure on Trump from his own base, who are feeling this at the pump, becomes the variable that nobody is adequately pricing in right now.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario I genuinely lie awake about. The American conservative has reported that despite everything we've spent, we failed to destroy Iran's weapons capacity. We burned through munitions. They still have their arsenal largely intact. That means Iran goes into these negotiations knowing it can absorb military punishment, reconstitute, and come back. And if Senator King's intelligence instincts are right about the nuclear scientists racing for the bomb, we could be looking at a situation where in 18 months, we're facing a nuclear-armed Iran that survived this confrontation and concluded the only deterrent that works is the one we spent 30 years trying to prevent. The risk isn't that this peace proposal fails. The risk is that it succeeds just enough to let Iran cross the nuclear threshold while the world exhales.
Marcus Webb and Sophia Reeves' extraordinary analysis, genuinely terrifying stakes. One thing is absolutely certain tonight. Somewhere in Tehran, someone is reading that inflation number and smiling. It is Friday, and the constitutional clock has officially expired. 60 days ago, President Trump notified Congress that American forces were engaged in hostilities against Iran. Under the War Powers Resolution, that meant Trump had 60 days to get congressional authorization or pull out. He has done neither. Instead, his Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is arguing the ceasefire paused the clock, a claim that has ignited a firestorm on both sides of the aisle. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz situation is hammering global markets. Britain is staring down potential 6% inflation, and there are real questions about whether U.S. forces are actually standing down at all. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is Pete Hegseth's paused clock argument a stroke of legal genius, or is this the executive branch simply making up the rules as it goes?
Thanks, Emma. Let me be direct. It's mostly the latter, and I say that as someone who fully supported the strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The War Powers Resolution doesn't have a pause button. You don't get to declare a ceasefire that your administration brokered, and then use that same ceasefire as a legal shield against the deadline the ceasefire was supposed to make irrelevant. That's circular reasoning, and the lawyers in the room know it. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. The Democrats screaming about this are hypocrites of the highest order. They said nothing when Obama turned Libya into a jihadist catastrophe without a single congressional vote. But two wrongs don't make a right, and the principle here matters enormously. As Douglas Murray has argued for years, the West's credibility rests partly on its internal coherence, on its institutions working. If Trump wants to finish what he started with Iran, he should go to Congress, make the case publicly, and win that vote. The intelligence on Iran's nuclear program should make that argument for him. What I can't accept is an administration that wins militarily and then loses constitutionally through sheer legal sloppiness.
But Sophia, isn't there a credible argument that going to Congress, opening up weeks of floor debate, amendment votes, partisan grandstanding, actually hands Tehran a propaganda victory and undermines the very military deterrence you're defending? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Sophia is right that the legal argument is weak, but I think she's actually underselling how consequential the economic dimension of this is, and that changes the strategic calculus entirely. Here's the data that nobody is talking about loudly enough. 20% of the world's oil transits the Strait of Hormuz. The Bank of England is already warning of 6% inflation in Britain. That's not a rounding error. That's a genuine cost of living crisis landing on ordinary people in allied democracies. The real pressure on Trump isn't coming from congressional Democrats waiving the war powers resolution. It's coming from petrol prices and grocery bills. And here's what that means practically. The administration has a narrow window to either lock in a durable Iran settlement or get formal authorization. Because the moment the economic pain becomes politically unbearable, the pressure to just walk away becomes enormous. Going to Congress isn't just constitutionally correct. It's the only way to build the political durability needed to see this through to an outcome that actually sticks.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. We're not talking about building political durability. We're talking about whether the executive branch gets to rewrite constitutional law on the fly because it's convenient. The economic pain is real. I don't dispute that. But if we accept the principle that presidents can simply declare a ceasefire and thereby suspend the legal framework governing military force, we've handed every future administration, Democrat or Republican, a blank check for permanent, undeclared warfare. Think about that. Think about what a president with less restrained instincts does with that precedent. The trajectory here is dangerous, and frankly, the ceasefire might not hold. If Iran's hardliners push back, if the strait stays closed, if proxy activity resumes, we're back in active hostilities with the clock already expired, the legal argument already used up, and no authorization in hand. That's not a hypothetical. That's the real risk sitting right in front of us.
Here's what I want to know, because this feels like it could tip in multiple directions very quickly. If the ceasefire collapses, if Iranian proxies resume activity, if the Strait of Hormuz stays effectively closed into the summer, what does the next 6 months actually look like? James, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, there are really 3 tracks. Track 1, the administration runs out the legal argument. Republican leadership shields Trump from a congressional rebuke, and this becomes a new normal that nobody actually challenges in court because the judiciary won't touch it. That's the most likely short-term outcome. Track 2, Trump goes to Congress proactively, frames it as strength, wins the authorization vote, and actually emerges with more political capital heading into midterms. That's the best outcome. Track 3, and this is the risk. The ceasefire collapses before any of this is resolved, and we're back to active conflict with expired legal authority, rising inflation, and a divided Congress. If that trajectory continues, you're looking at a genuine constitutional confrontation that no administration in 50 years has actually had to face down.
Here's what concerns me most, and I think this is the scenario people aren't gaming out seriously enough. Iran has spent 40 years mastering the art of strategic patience. Their hardliners don't need to restart the air war. They just need to keep the Strait of Hormuz ambiguous, keep energy prices elevated, keep Western economies under pressure, and wait for the political will in Washington to fracture. The real risk isn't a dramatic ceasefire collapse, it's a slow-motion erosion where the economic pain becomes unbearable. Congress starts defunding the operation anyway, and the United States ends up withdrawing not because it was defeated militarily, but because it was defeated domestically. What history tells us is that's exactly how great power resolve has eroded before. Not in one decisive battle, but in 1,000 cuts of political exhaustion. And that is why getting this right constitutionally and strategically, right now, this week, matters more than almost anything else on Washington's plate.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, a genuinely extraordinary conversation on an extraordinary day. One thing's certain, somewhere in Tehran tonight, there are people in rooms studying every word coming out of Washington, and they like what they're hearing. That's all for this update. Stay informed and stay connected. I'm Emma. We'll be back shortly.